Can. What's the countdown usually?
Was there an issue? Is it started the broadcast? Do you know? Hang on.
Just shout your password, mate, to the world. It's fine.
What? Oh, what do you mean we're on? Did you just close it? Oh, great. Well, that was a bit embarrassing. That is not the start we wanted. I apologise, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another Tuesday live session here at Graph UK HQ. Unfortunately, we are not live on Facebook. There's some technical issues in the background, but that doesn't stop us. We'll get into today's session. So today is Rainwater Research, and we are joined once again by the guru on all things Rainwater Harvesting. That's David Stagg. David, welcome.
Good morning, Callum.
How
are
you,
everyone? Extremely well, thanks.
How was your weekend?
Weekend was good. Glorious sunshine.
For the Saturday.
Okay, it wasn't actually that great, really, was it? We had a glorious week prior, so of course we started Friday night here. We had a nice barbecue.
We did.
A great way to start the weekend, and then a bit hit and miss, as you say, on Saturday. I think it was relatively dry in the morning, and they had like pretty much rain all weekend after that, didn't we?
See, I got shouted at in the office about this, but I quite enjoy the fact that we had 3 days of sunshine, then 2 days of iffy weather, because I am very much balance and moderation in the fact that I enjoyed. Now I can enjoy sunny days for like 3 days in a row, but as soon as it's like raining for 2 days, I'm okay with it, because then the temperature is a lot cooler. It's easier to sleep. I can deal with it. I could not have like 2 weeks of solid sun. I need like moderation and some balance in the universe in order to feel better. I got shouted at for it, but
justifiably, yeah. I think everyone wants glorious sunshine for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Well, forever.
No, I like moderation. I can.
We're here to talk about rainwater harvesting. We like rainwater.
Yeah, exactly. We're paid to talk why we love rainwater anyway. So, did you enjoy Father's Day? What did you get up
to? Father's Day was relatively quiet. Really. I mean, we had did have a celebration with the family.
Mm-hmm.
Had Indian takeaway and got to see all the kids larking about. So there's a big group of us. Got together over the weekend. And then typically it was my dad's birthday yesterday. They always kind of coincide with each other.
Very nice.
Yeah, we managed to celebrate a bit of time with him yesterday as well. And then, yeah, outside of that, it was just a normal weekend for us. How about yourself?
Went up to the old man on Saturday. Went for a walk in Banbury before going up to see him. Then we had a brunch together, then a barbecue. He's bought this absolutely extravagant barbecue. Did I tell you about his man cave that he's built?
No.
He's had a proper man cave
built. Time to talk about this now.
Yeah, he's had a proper man cave built because he had budget after they redone the kitchen. So it's a huge thing in the garden. But then he had more money to spare. So he bought it's like a £1,500 barbecue. But it's one of these like turret ones that not only barbecues, it smokes. You can do all sorts of things with it. So he basically did a joint of lamb. It was like a leg of lamb and slow roasted it in the barbecue. It was very nice.
He's going to use this all year round, not just as a...
I believe so, because in his new man cave, he's allowed to... The way my cousin built it, he's got a concrete slab that allows him to cook. So he's got his pizza oven in there and his barbecue in there.
Okay.
So yeah, he'll be able to cook all year round, but...
Oh, well, I'm glad he can for that kind of...
I know. Well, in his Father's Day card, I put to the biggest child I know. And that's what he is. Like, who buys a £1,500 barbecue?
Someone who likes to cook meat, apparently.
No, he was just. I was just there, like when I've heard but he said, "Oh, it will do me for years because it's made of ceramic, so it won't decay." So that's his justification on spending that much on a barbecue.
Okay.
And I managed to sneak in some time to play Football Manager when I got back home. So all is well.
Okay.
All is very well. But anyway, we'll stop rabbiting on and we'll get into the crux of today's rainwater research session. And the first main topic of today is how rainwater harvesting actually works. We get many questions about this and many newcomers when they start researching rainwater, because obviously you're on a journey of rainwater research, they are wondering how it actually works in the first place. So David, take it away. How does rainwater harvesting work?
Okay, well, it's again, hopefully people have seen our previous conversations on this, and we do a whole CPD on rainwater harvesting, which I think we're doing 2 of those later this week. So
yeah,
it's obviously I suppose the best thing to where the place best to start is, of course, from the clouds and where the rain comes from. And generally, it's the idea of capturing that rainfall so we can utilize it at a later stage, which is, of course, particularly good with this intermittent weather we've been having this year. So with the catchment of rainwater harvesting, we're very much looking to capture rainwater off surface areas, generally off the roofs of buildings. And then we're diverting that water via the downpipes into a catchment tank. Now, this could be an above ground tank like a water butt, or it could be a slightly more complicated underground system. And the idea, of course, is to keep that water as clean as possible. So then we bring it back through the property for a rainwater harvesting underground system, or if it's outside irrigation, we want, of course, keep that water in a relatively good condition by cycling it quickly, by using it towards the plants and doing some outside cleaning. So we very much introduce a filtration as the water comes into the tank. And then the idea is extracting that water off in the applications that people want to use it for. So whether this be for their toilets or their washing machines, or cleaning their cars, watering their plants, outside irrigation. It really is, there is quite a lot of applications people can utilize it for on a domestic level, without even really considering a commercial level where we can really start talking about some relatively decent cost saves in terms of potentially saving on wastewater consumption. So rainwater harvesting on the whole is really straightforward in terms of its process and how and why we do it. It's just people generally getting appreciation of why we need to do it for.
Yes. And when with rainwater harvesting, especially on a domestic case, there are basically two forms of system. You have, or I say free, you have your garden irrigation, which is very much, you'll have an internal hose connection box in the lid of the tank and potentially an external hose connection box, connect a hose and use it for garden irrigation with our garden covered systems. But then on a domestic purpose, you have your direct and indirect, and they operate in slightly different ways.
That's correct. So generally speaking, we try to fully automate our systems as much as possible, so the homeowner doesn't have to get involved with the workings of the system. So the most basic form we generally talk about is a submersible pump system, where the submersible pump basically works by detecting drops in pressure. So if you were to open a tap, for example, that drops pressure in the pipeline, so the pump will turn on automatically and try and repressurize the line, and it won't do so until the valve is closed, and of course the pipeline will repressurize and it will shut off. So that is the basis of all pretty much underground rainwater harvesting systems. And we have a pressure pump supporting the system. As I say, it's fully automated. We then incorporate or build on from there in terms of how will we supplement the rainwater if we run out. Ideally speaking, if we were to have the weather we've been having now, where we've had glorious sunshine for 4 to 5 days, and then we've had, of course, quite a heavy rainfall over on Saturday of the weekend. That's the kind of ideal for rainwater harvesting, because we're catching a lot of rainwater, we're then storing it, and of course we can then use it for the time thereafterwards. But if we were to run out of that rainwater in the ground tank and we want to continue with the operation system, how do we supplement that? Of course, you would have a temporary time where the system is backed up with mains water. And the mains water backup changes in terms of the type of system that you have. So a direct feed system will typically have a float switch, which will detect the level of water in the underground tank. And of course, once the float switch drops down, it's detecting there's no rainwater in the tank, and it will switch over to a mains water backup supply temporarily until we have our next rainfall period. The float switch lifts back up again. And of course, it reverts back to rainwater. We then talk about indirect systems, and indirect systems is when we talk about indirectly supplying the appliances. So we would typically look at a loft or a header tank. And with the header tank, of course, we're pumping water up to a high static area. And then, of course, from there, we're gravity feeding. Again, that gravity feeding is operated by the opening and closing of something like a toilet valve, for example. Someone flushes the toilet, the valve opens, the system refills, and the valve closes. So with an indirect system, we are indirectly filling the applications, but of course, we've got to get the water into that high roof space initially. So there is some benefits to the indirect system in terms of things like if you were to have a power cut, you've always got that volume of water in that header tank there and available. And of course, with the header tank system, if you were to run out of rainwater, we have the second valve with the mains water feed going directly to it. So that's how the mains water kind of ties in there with that particular application. So again, once it's implemented, really the homeowner doesn't have to get involved too much, other than really just connecting into the system and reusing the rainwater as effectively as they can do.
And when it comes to power connections for powering up the rainwater harvesting system in order to work, with the direct system, you're going to be plugging your power directly into the console that's kind of wall mounted externally to the tank. But with indirect, correct me if I'm wrong, you need basically an indirect or a direct feed of power to the submersible pump inside the rainwater tank.
Yeah, so you've got we haven't really touched on this yet, but you've kind of mentioned two different types of system there. We generally have a submersible pump which goes, of course, in an underground tank, and that generally takes anything like a 13 amp 230 volt supply, and we get an electrical feed out to our underground tank to support that pump. We also have a wall mounted pump option. We refer to them as Eco Plus or Sensory systems. There are other manufacturers that have their own type of system that works in a similar way. But with these systems, we've got, of course, a wall-mounted pump, which is sucking water out of our underground tank before then feeding it directly from that wall-mounted pump to the appliances. And again, with that, we will generally look at potentially just a one mains power supply. You could run it off two if you wanted to. It basically depends on whether or not you want to get an electrician in to wire up and connect all the connections into one particular outlet point, which the system's fairly capable of doing. But if you were to have potentially two sockets available, it generally can be done slightly easier in terms of setting it up, because we have a 3-port valve, which is, of course, opening and closing on rainwater and main water with the level of the float switch in the underground tank. And of course, you can take power directly to that 3-port valve, but you can also wire it through a junction box and split the power if you wanted to as well. But that's generally for within the installation instructions, an electrician to sort out for you, should you want to go into that level of detail. Of course, if the customer wants to ring in and talk to us about it, we'll talk about it in a bit more detail at the time. So
perfect. I believe that answers the main question of how rainwater harvesting works. We've gone into a decent bit of detail of not only how it works basically in theory of how the rainwater falls on the roof of the property, channels down, tank to store and then reuse, but then also how different types of system work, and obviously how it works in terms of power needed in order to make sure the system works as it's designed to.
yes.
So we went into a lot of detail, so we hope you enjoyed that part. Now it's time for the project recap for today's live session. So this one, we unfortunately haven't got any pictures or photos at the moment, just because it is an ongoing project that we've got going on currently. But this system is a combined rainwater harvesting and stormwater management system. We briefly pick up on these in the CPDs that we do.
Yes.
But it's very much something that we're seeing a lot more regular in terms of retention and detention tanks. But you have more details about the project.
So as you've just mentioned, Callum, this is a bit more of a specialised project. When we talk about detention and retention, it's generally looking after stormwater in some way. Certainly detention is. And then when we talk about retention, we are retaining some of that stormwater for reuse later through rainwater harvesting. So we're building on the detention application. So this is quite an interesting project which we got involved with the customer some time ago now. I think it was about a month ago. It was actually one that contacted me through the Calendly software.
Yep.
So if the guys don't know who are listening, we basically have an online portal where people can make a direct inquiry to us, and then they set up a meeting via Zoom, and we generally have one face-to-face conversation with them to discuss their project and really get an idea of what they're trying to achieve from their project. Off the back of that meeting, we received relatively in-depth project information from the customer. They sent through some drainage stuff. From there, I thought it was worthwhile sending an engineer to sites just to really check their drainage levels and their potential pipe runs to get to where the tanks were. As we're looking at rainwater and stormwater, it's quite important to ensure that we can get the drainage levels right. With, of course, the stormwater elements, we are looking at basically bringing water into that tank, and then we have a choked outlet, and that choked outlet needs to be at the bottom of the tank. So if anyone knows anything to do with stormwater management, ideally speaking, you want to have a gravity solution. But of course, when we talk about that, we do have, even if you were to potentially have a long, shallow tank, we still need to have the inflow, generally speaking, at the top of that tank and the outflow at the bottom. So with that drop in invert levels, which is the drop in the pipe work, we need to basically ensure that the levels on site are correct, so it will marry up with what they have on site. So is the solution going to work? Of course, if it's not going to work, you can then need to incorporate some sort of electrical pump to lift the water back up again. So it's quite important when we talk about detention and retention that we can get the drainage levels correct. So yeah, one of our engineers went to the site to gain a bit more understanding of how it was going to work. We've basically finalised that they could do have a drop of around about 800 mil. So that worked great. We've designed now a tank in and around that to incorporate that. We've put the proposal back to them, so they just need to take that now to get approved, and then we're supplying them a system which, of course, is primarily handling the stormwater runoff from the site. So that's from the roof areas and some impermeable paving. That's running into our tank. We've then got various different layers of filtration as we're pumping that water back out to reuse it for the rainwater application back into the property. They've also got some nice planting areas of around about 1,700 square meters. So it really is quite a nice overall project for them. It's 2 properties, so we're pretty much duplicating the supply for them. And yeah, hopefully, once we get the project completed, we can share the work we've done on that site with the guys that are listening.
What size tank is it?
So the stormwater works out to be 10 cube for one property and 6 cube for the other. And then, of course, we're building on those volumes for the rainwater retention for building back into that. And we're looking at around about 3,000 litres of rainwater, mainly due to the demand and what they're going to be using the rainwater for. So again, this is more about rainwater harvesting. Keep diving in deeper. When we look about, of course, we talked about it again in the past. When we talk about sizing of rainwater harvesting systems, we look at the potential yield to how much they can harvest, and of course, we look at the demand. In this particular application, as we are very much using or capturing that water off the not only the roof area but the impermeable surfaces, of course, the quality of water is not quite so good as it's coming off ground level. We get a bit more dirt and grits coming through the system. So for that reason, we're generally advising the customer to use the water for outside irrigation and cleaning only, and not pumping it back through their property. So for that, we deemed that we've looked at those planting areas and generally what they're going to use each week for their rainwater application, and we've put the demand on top of their stormwater requirements. So they've got 3,000 litres to use where they want to. So they're relatively pleased about that. So just need to get that finalised, and then we can look into supplying, and hopefully we can get the engineer back on site to advise them with the install and commissioning as well.
Perfect. I mean, that's a great little project, because we're seeing kind of, even though the combined systems are quite rare for us, we are seeing them more and more come on as people are understanding how rainwater harvesting, the benefits of it, can be used for reducing the surface water runoff that could be produced from the new buildings that are taking place.
Yeah.
Perfect. So now it's time to answer any questions that have come in during today's live stream. So we should have them come up on the screen now. Hopefully my eyes are okay to read these. Do rainwater harvesting systems need a filter?
Okay. With rainwater harvesting systems, it's always encouraged to have a filter. Even when you're talking about a standard above ground tank, we're looking, of course, an above ground tank to divert that water into our container. And although you may just get a standard diverter, which collects the water from that downpipe and shifts it across, it's always good to try and incorporate a mesh filter to stop potential debris coming down into our tank. We want the water to be as clean as possible. And the reason why you want the water to be clean is that there is potential for build-off of biology and microorganisms inside that water. So if that water is left, of course, you may see it going green and all that sort of things, certainly if it's going to be subject to UV light. So that's just something to bear in mind. We want to keep the water as clean as possible. So with above ground systems, and certainly the catchment of water which is going to be in UV, we want to try and filter it as best as we can, even on a basic level. If you're going to an underground system, we of course encourage filtration of water prior to it comes into the tank. If you're then going to use that water for the standard applications we talk about, rainwater harvesting, so outside irrigation, toilet flushing, and your washing machine, generally speaking, that level of filtration is potentially enough. But of course, we can build on filtration. So we can start incorporating UV filters and micron filters. And with these additional layers of filtration, we're improving the water quality further. And then we can start using it for other applications. So things like showers and potentially sinks and other things. So there are quite complex levels of filtration that you can build onto a rainwater harvesting system. Certainly, an initial level is very important, but depending on what the customer wants to use it for, we can build on it and improve the water quality to a much better state.
And most systems have an integrated filter, come with most manufacturers now. But there is the case that they could have an external filter, especially on commercial applications.
Very much so. Again, it's very much important for the customer, the installer, whoever it is, to really consider what the client wants to use the rainwater for, and then implement a solution which is going to support them. This is where you might be speaking to someone who's got a bit more knowledge on potentially rainwater harvesting or any topic that you're looking at. I mean, we talk about wastewater treatment and all other stuff on this channel, but certainly get someone having an appreciation and understanding, and hopefully agrees with the principles of what they're installing, implements the system, and then of course then you're going to get a much better all-round system which is going to support not only the clients, but going forward it's going to work very, very efficiently and work well. So it should be easy to maintain and service.
Perfect. That answers that one. Then the next question we have that's come in: can rainwater harvesting be used for commercial applications? We've touched on it briefly, but
okay, yeah, we can build on this quite a bit more. But I think it's important to generally gain an understanding of potentially the rainwater usage and what you would typically see. So we've normally talked about domestic level applications. With that, we generally see 50% reduction in certainly your mains water demand if you were to incorporate rainwater harvesting on a domestic application. Again, treating the water further to, of course, enhance its quality, you can build on that 50% and potentially do potentially up to 100%, but of course, need UV filtration, microfilters, all that sort of stuff. So a little bit more for the customer to carve out. When we talk about commercial applications, we generally have quite a lot more demand, and of course, with demand, we can then substitute the rainwater captured more. So with commercial applications, even if we can talk about office buildings, we can talk about agriculture, so like feeding of livestock, all these sorts of things. Of course, with the bigger buildings, we have access to a lot more rainwater through the yield and the demand. Of course, there's more people on the premises, or in the case of agriculture, there's more demand from those animals that we can really start substituting quite a bit more of that untreated rainwater, just standard level of filtration. So you can normally see up to 70 to potentially 90% reduction. Of course, when we look at that, that's really is quite a motivation for the bigger projects to incorporate rainwater harvesting. And you more often than not do see rainwater harvesting in some form on commercial applications. You just need to stop and take an appreciation of it. Again, you could always talk about with the more rainwater you're saving versus your own mains water consumption, the more you're going to save on money, and the payback period is going to be shorter and all that sort of stuff. So commercial applications is certainly a much more stronger argument to incorporate rainwater harvesting on a commercial application versus domestic. But of course, there are very much good uses for domestic applications as well.
Perfect. That answers that one. Then the next question we've got coming in: why is rainwater harvesting necessary?
Okay. With the rainwater harvesting, in general, we're seeing more and more of a demand for it. This is mainly because we're getting more densely populated as human beings. I mean, we're all congregating into cities, and obviously villages are getting bigger, towns are getting bigger. So the demand on the mains water pipelines to support those people, of course, is getting much more. It's going to come to a stage where, of course, the mains water supply to support that settlement is going to be too high for the mains water alone. And when that happens, we're going to have to start looking for other ways to substitute that mains water. And of course, rainwater harvesting is the most readily accessible way to do that. So at some stage, whether it be now, 10, 20 years, it's certainly going to be in our generation, I would have thought, rainwater harvesting is going to be seen to be very much a requirement potentially on all buildings. Certainly in more urban areas where humans are basically living together. So again, if we can get ahead of this and reduce potentially the mains water demand, the better. Of course, when we talk about rainwater harvesting in general, there are other benefits to, of course, rainwater harvesting, like potentially reducing stormwater runoff. Again, we've talked about this in this channel, with the reduction or catchment of some of that stormwater into our rainwater harvesting tank, we're potentially reducing the risk of flooding. You see all now on all these potentially coastlines all around the country, all these potential flood risk areas where, of course, rainwater harvesting and obviously stormwater of Ken is built into that. If these applications are built in and thought about in a bit more detail, we could potentially get that water, which has been basically falling from the sky, channeled into the ground, into our storage tanks to be reused later. I mean, it's going to offer us a huge buffer if everyone has a 3,500, 5,000 litre rainwater harvesting tank of water under their ground. So there is huge scope for rainwater harvesting. You can't emphasize enough how important it's going to be. Not it's important now, but in the future, it's going to be insane how effective they're going to be for everyone. And of course, it's just a small note with rainwater. And I imagine that everyone who owns a house is feeling it now in terms of with the ever-rising cost of energy bills and stuff, not only for energy, but of course, potentially for water as well. We're very lucky here in the UK to have relatively cheap and access to mains water. Of course, Scotland, a very benefit. They don't pay for their mains water as part of their council tax, but that could soon change when we could start seeing people paying a lot more for their mains water, incoming and disposal of their mains water. So again, the more we can substitute now, the more beneficial it's going to be in terms of potentially people saving money, as well as, of course, the huge environmental benefits as well.
Perfect. That answers that one. Then the next question we have that's come in: what is the typical cost of a rainwater harvesting system?
A typical rainwater harvesting system?
Yes.
Wow. Okay. Do I want to go deep dive into this one?
Give ballpark. So say, because we've mentioned the different systems. We've mentioned you've got the free ducted system, you've got a garden comfort, which is just garden irrigation only. You've got a direct system, which is your Eco Pluses and Silencios, and then you've got your indirect system. Okay. So I think the price for...
I was going to go a bit further than that.
Okay.
Okay. Bear with me, guys. It's important. It's important to have an appreciation of rainwater harvesting. Of course, the basic form of rainwater harvesting, we've talked about... I've touched on wastewater and stormwater today. Yep. I haven't touched really on garden too much. No. So I need to give garden a shout out.
Okay.
So, of course, the basic form of rainwater harvesting is potentially having a form of water. Right?
Yep.
You're purely an above ground tank to collect water off an outbuilding, whether it be a garage, could be the main property, or it could be a greenhouse, whatever it might be. It's a small storage container to store rainwater for reuse later. And when we talk about, of course, domestic water butts, they come in many different sizes, shapes, and colours. Of course, Grafty, as a manufacturing of plastic business, we have a great selection here to meet pretty much anyone's design and desires. So it might be worth people, if they're interested in just doing a little bit, a water butt is a great start. If you want to talk about this in a bit more complicated, and we've talked about, of course, underground systems, we generally start here at basically a 1,500 litre tank. And of course, sizes can then increase exponentially depending on whether it's a domestic or commercial application. And of course, what they want to use the rainwater for. So there's huge scope in terms of how big a rainwater harvesting can be. So just bear that in mind. When someone basically commands up to you in an exhibition, this happened to me in the past, it actually made me a little bit annoyed at the time. But
shock.
Basically says, a customer calls up and says, how big can you do? I'm like, well, that's a bit of a
I remember
question.
This. I remember this. You really annoyed him as well because you wouldn't give a straightforward answer, because I guess it's not a really straightforward question. But go on.
But yes, as you say, the scope for rainwater harvesting in terms of sizing is exponential. It can be whatever you want. Different shapes and sizes of the tanks, customer can really go for it.
Yes.
So that's something to bear in mind. So when you're looking at costs, just please bear that in mind, that you can have whatever size tank you want, pretty much. And of course, and then as Callum, you've mentioned, we've got different types of pump packages. So how they're going to reutilize that rainwater, what applications they're going to use it for, how many outlet points, all this sort of stuff. So if you want to get a basic figure in terms of a domestic rainwater harvesting system, you're probably looking at anything from £1,200 to £1,500 for a small system. And of course, depending on the size of the tank and the size of the pump station, all this sort of things built on top of that, of course, it could increase quite exponentially. But again, along with the supply, you need to consider installation. And with installation, we're generally looking at, of course, is this an add-on to an existing building, or is it being implemented at the
early stage of
the project? So again, if you've got the equipment, machinery on site to do the digging or an excavator, that could be huge cost savings for the customer, because they're not having to rehire that machinery to dig the hole. So again, it's good to have an appreciation not only of the supply, but of course the installation. So have a chat with the guys in and around your area that do groundworks and installation works for underground systems. Get an idea of how much it's going to cost you as a complete package, and then with that you can make a more informed decision of do I want to go ahead with this? I mean, absolutely great, well done you if you do, but yeah, it's good to have an overall appreciation. It's not just the supply you need to take into consideration. I mean, if it's of course it's a water butt. If we just drag this back to the beginning where we started, if it's a water butt, I mean, anyone could connect a downpipe filter onto a downpipe and then direct this into a water butt. So that's the most straightforward supply. Anyone can do a little bit to help save the environment and of course save their mains water consumption. So really is just come in when you ask that question, please have an appreciation of how broad that question can be.
Yes.
It's better that you can give as much more supporting information to the person, so then you can come into an overall better solution for yourself. So
and that story that you mentioned with the guy that you had a falling out with an exhibition, I remember. It was a self-build exhibition, wasn't it? So you come up asking for the Rainwater Harvesting system size, and you should have been just blunt and say, well, the biggest we manufacture is 152,000 litres. Would you like to order one? Even though you can't get it into the UK. That'd really ticked him off.
Yeah, but I'm not there to upset people.
True, it would have been funny. It would have been funny.
I think the guy was actually looking at potentially exporting as well, so it wasn't coming into the UK.
Oh, okay.
So again, it opens up more questions. It's not really generally for me to basically say, oh yeah, if we can do 52,000 litre here into the UK, or 152,000 litre to somewhere in Germany. I mean, everything needs, again, have an appreciation of potentially transportation of these sorts of things, as well as not only the cost of purchasing the tank, linking the tanks together. We could go on forever. It's good to hopefully not ask such broad questions, and hopefully get more informed, direct responses.
Well, the best thing is, even if you do a 52,000 litre system, we did a job over in Ireland where we made it, I think it was 152 or 156, because we linked three tanks together. Yeah. So it can make any size.
Anything's possible.
Exactly. But that, I believe, is all of the questions that have come in during today's session. And I think, we got the thumbs up from the guys in the background to say that is everything that's been answered. So thank you once again for tuning in. Thank you for taking your time out of your day to come watch us talk about all things rainwater harvesting. And David, thank you for joining us once again.
Thanks for having me.
And you'll be back in the hot seat next week for Wastewater Wisdom.
I hope so.
Yes, we will be. So make sure you come back then for next week's live session on all things wastewater treatment. Until then, have a great week, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank you.